What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Freedom to Flourish podcast. Today, we've got an episode that is geared more towards a pain complaint. One of the biggest pain complaints that we'll see is chronic neck pain. And there's a lot of underlying causes that can be contributing to that we often will deal with, more so in the functional medicine mindset as opposed to just musculoskeletal issues. And so, plenty of liver issues, immune system issues, diaphragm issues, you name it, that we can really dig into to try to fix things that just have been going on for a long time. We often find that, if we just adjust things or just treat the muscles and don't really dig into those underlying causes that will lead to chronic muscle imbalances, things just don't quite sort themselves out. So hopefully this is really applicable to a lot of our listeners. I know I personally hear this 10 plus times per week in my office,
Yeah,
probably. I would
yeah,
argue that almost every single woman that comes into the office or just in general, almost every single woman that comes into the office has some degree of chronic neck pain because of a lot of times hormone issues, in my opinion. So, yeah, we're going to get into all that stuff and hopefully provide some good things and thought-provoking little clinical pearls that you can get started on from home to help improve yourself. So anyway, Dr. Joel, how are you doing this morning?
good morning. I'm doing well. Doing well. Excited to be here. Neck pain is an issue. Like you said, a lot of patients kind of complain about it and deal with it. And here's one of the biggest points to this episode, Dr. Tim, if I had to kind of summarize, it's that yes, the muscles and the bones can hurt, and the neck, the joints can hurt. And while massage and adjustments and stretching and some of those things may be helpful, if you've had this for a long time, chances are, yes, there's some tightness and stuff that probably needs to be worked through, but it's likely coming from an internal issue. And especially if you've had adjustments, if you've gotten massage, if you've done stretching and things like that, and the pain kind of gets alleviated a little bit, but then it comes back, that's how you know it's an internal issue. And so we're going to jump into those things. Specifically, you mentioned the liver health and hormones. We'll talk about that. The immune system, I find to be super important. We'll talk about that and why and kind of what to do about it. And then the gut health, I tend to find important. And we'll talk about why and what to do about it. So, Dr. Tim, can you explain a little bit to start us off here, jumping into like what's some of this like short like physiology as far as how do these internal issues cause pain with the neck? I thought these were just muscles and joints. How are these things related to our internal system?
Yeah, so within a traditional chiropractic setting, it's seen that subluxation or the, quote, bone out of place or, stuck segment, whatever you want to call it, segmental dysfunction, as a general term, leads to downstream neurologic issues with muscles where they will become imbalanced. And so if you adjust it, give it the nice pop, then it should regulate nervous system tone downstream, therefore turning muscles back on. With our philosophy on things, it ends up being a little bit more of the inverse, where things are heavily dictated and mostly dictated by muscles, and then also on top of that, the fascia that holds them together. And so things that lead to muscle dysfunction lead to subluxation or lead to pain, lack of range of motion, all of those things. And so there is a system of connections, we'll call it, between our different parts of our nervous system, between organs, between other tissues, between muscles, you name it, all kinds of stuff. And so as we're developing, our brain and spinal cord develop first, and then things will migrate outward from there. Things that migrate outward from the same section of the spinal cord will have similar connections that overlap into adulthood. And so our muscles, our skin, our spinal segments, and our organs that all migrate outward from those same sections, I can't talk this morning, sections of the spinal cord will have those connections into adulthood. And so when one thing becomes dysfunctional, the others can become dysfunctional. And so if an organ is irritated due to, say, hormones or infections or, chronic immune system issues or whatever it is, there's going to be some sort of muscle effect downstream of that. And so each organ has different muscles that are associated with it. The liver is tied to the rhomboids and the pec sternal. The small intestine is tied to the abs and the quad muscles. The reproductive system is tied to the glute muscles and piriformis, things like that. There's different connections between certain organs, certain muscles. And so when organs become dysfunctional, those muscles do not work. And so with chronic reproductive system issues, a lot of times you'll see low back issues because the pelvic muscles will become dysfunctional. You can also get where if they become hypertonic with bearing down, it kind of tugs downward on the uterus, pulls on the fascial connections that go along the neck, and then go along the front of the spine, and then where they insert it into the neck, it'll actually pull downwards and lead to some neck weakness. And so that's where a lot of times the hormone connections will be present for neck issues. Along with that, whenever there are hormone issues, there's typically a liver or gallbladder detoxification issue. Liver is always involved with that. And like I said previously, rhomboid and pec sternal are connected to the liver. And so if your rhomboids are not working and your shoulder blade is not stabilized properly, the joints above and below are going to have to make up for that. And that's where the neck will get stiff and it'll get all jammed up, and that's where you can get neck pain. And so there's a lot of different circumstances like this. Those are just a couple examples for the sake of just explaining and hinting towards that right now. But what we'll do in the office is we'll figure out and use the systems of checks and balances within the systems healthcare technique to figure out, is this muscle weakness related to an organ issue, or is it related to some sort of just musculoskeletal compensations? And so we use various injury reflexes and muscle testing to figure that out. And then once we get to a primary organ issue, we'll figure out what's wrong with it, what the nutritional fix is, and then from there treat the organ-related Chapman reflex, which is kind of like a hard reset for that organ. And so think of it like, your light bulb's turned off and then the Chapman reflex just, flips it back on. It works after that. And so all of the neurologic connections or all of the neurologic indicators that are tied to that organ will get better. And so if the muscle is weak as a result of that and just is a 4 to 5 weakness on your myotome grading scale, it will turn that back to a 5 out of 5. Therefore, it can accommodate resistance, all of that stuff. And if there's any pain driven by that, that should improve. And so that's where the chronic issues due to organ issues are tied in. However, if there is chronic weakness of a muscle due to an internal issue, there's going to be myofascial compensations that result from that. And so that's where we will turn that light switch on, get that muscle working. But then if there are local trigger points in those muscles, if there's a need for scraping of that muscle, there's other layers of things where we can actually apply various myofascial techniques to fix that muscle further, to get rid of those compensations. And a lot of times you'll get compensations with other muscles. Say it is a hormone issue, rhomboid's not working, you get that fixed. You can test and see, other local muscles like the lat, the traps, infraspinatus, teres minor, major, all those things that help stabilize the shoulder blade and have a similar action. They will also typically be dysfunctional to some degree because they are either not working as well or they are overworking to make up for that rhomboid. And so it goes, turn the muscle back on, whether it's from an organ issue or myofascial compensations. And then from there, if there is still pain, figure out what other muscles are weak, or on that muscle that you already fixed, let's do trigger point therapy, scraping, miscellaneous other things to get things totally fine. So anyway, that's usually in my head kind of how we'll work through things. And that's how I explain it to patients in the office. And that's where repeated working through the layers of organ issues is super necessary because, like you mentioned with gut issues, pretty standard. You need, at least 2 to 3, sometimes 4 herbs to balance out microbiome imbalances. And if that's not totally fixed, then those muscles tied to it will just never strengthen completely. And so you're always going to have other things making up for it. And that's where by the time the patients arrive in our office, we're not really a acute pain type of practice setting. We're more of a chronic pain setting where people have been to regular chiros, they've been to PTs, they've been to, OTs or whatever, massage therapists, and things just don't seem to fix like they want them to. And then that's where we dig a little bit deeper with these techniques and figure out, okay, well, it is an organ issue. Let's treat that. And then you can basically not do a whole lot of myofascial therapies at all. You can treat a Chapman's reflex, and that's the only actual muscle work that you do in a visit to treat the pain complaint. And people will walk out feeling a ton better because you're resetting those muscles.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
it's really cool. Dr. Joel, I'd love to hear kind of how you explain that with patients, because
Yeah.
that's just kind of the groove that I've fallen into and like my
Yeah.
philosophy on it. But
Yeah.
there's just so many different ways to go about it. We all do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's a great example. And what you're saying, Dr. Tim, is that we're looking at the body as a whole system, and the body is a whole system. I think we go into school and any doctor goes into school and they teach us, oh, there's 11 organ systems, cardiovascular system, musculoskeletal, and so on. The body's all connected. It's all one system. And when we realize that, we have a little bit of a starting point to begin to, I think, connect the dots for people. And so what you're saying is, hey, the muscles, which are activated by the nervous system, and the nervous system can be influenced by internal things like hormones and inflammation and immune system stuff, gut stuff. And so it's more than just the muscles. And a lot of that has to do with the development, like you mentioned, and how the nervous system developed, and the muscles are connected to different organ systems and so forth. These are all things that have been kind of seen and noticed in doctors over the last 60 years, something like that. And I'm sure more, but at least that's what we're familiar with. So yes, Dr. Tim, so just to add on to that, yeah, so with the liver, the rhomboids and that connection there, and so when those muscles are not super activated because of stress with the liver, then other muscles have to compensate, and that's where that neck tightness comes from. Similar with the immune system, the muscles related to the immune system, specifically talking about the spleen immune system, is the lower trap muscles. And so this is actually a really big piece here, because a lot of people say, oh, I think I have poor posture that's causing my neck pain. And it's important to understand that poor posture is really related to a weak immune system. So if your immune system is weaker, the lower trap muscles are not going to be as activated. And then naturally, it's going to be hard for you to hold your shoulders back in a nice, good postural position. When the shoulders are not being able to be held back and down, essentially they drift upwards, and then the trap muscles get tight. And the trap is not just the top of our shoulder. The trap also goes up into the bottom, into our neck, and then the bottom of our occiput, the bottom of our skull. And so that's a huge source of like chronic neck issues. And then similar, and I'll talk a little bit more on the immune system. We'll get into each of these systems just a little bit more as far as kind of like what to look for with these. But with the gut health, there's no, like the gut health, there are some different connections through the fascia, where the gut is largely activating the core muscles, but that can obviously downstream impact the neck. But I also find too that when you have gut issues, whether that's a bacterial overgrowth like SIBO, whether it's some kind of parasite issue, whether it's some kind of food sensitivity or fungal candida overgrowth, those issues cause problems with the gut health, and it really, 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 really stress your parasympathetic nervous system. They put your nervous system more into a little bit of this like fight or flight state, and that will stress a lot of components in your body, like your neck and the pelvis, because those are regions where we have more of our parasympathetic centers in our nervous system, through the neck and the pelvis. And so when people come in and they're like, yeah, my neck, I've had it adjusted, I've had it massaged, and it continues to go out. Well, that's a problem. That's a root issue problem with their nervous system, specifically with some kind of parasympathetic issue. Their gut health is under some stress. Their immune system's under some stress. And when you find those things and you fix those things, then the muscles become stable and the pain starts to go away. Same thing with the pelvis. When your hips are constantly going out, you get them adjusted, but they just go out again. Hey, it's coming from somewhere else. It's important to consider that. And with the pelvis, it's usually related to the gut health or the hormones, I find, as well. So, Dr. Tim, let's kind of jump into these things maybe a little bit more specifically. So, like when we talk about liver health and hormones, can you kind of give us just a recap of like, hey, these are the things generally that are going on, maybe some different symptoms you might notice that you can correlate, and then we can kind of get into like what do we do about it, and I'll touch on the immune system and the gut health briefly as well.
Yeah. So like I said before, this is the issue that I see in the office like all the time. Almost every single woman that comes into the office, even if they do not realize it, they're going to have some sort of neck stiffness where if you have them do range of motion, turn to the left, turn to the right, head up, head down, there's going to be some degree of pain, some degree of stiffness. And so they might just be like, oh yeah, that just feels normal, because that's what they're used to. However, once we get through and treat that Chapman reflex and things, rhomboids start to work and stabilize, you're like, man, oh wow, I guess that does feel better, And so why? Why is that the case? Why is it that hormones are related to the liver? Why is this a problem with all women, in my opinion? Well, here's why. So starting, yeah, I like to talk about this example on the podcast, but also with patients. Starting in high school. All of our teachers that are listening. How many girls show up to high school and they've got their coffee and they've got their Takis or whatever, hot Cheetos, and that's
Oh
all they're going to
man.
eat for the day. They get
Yeah.
these big giant sugary foo-foo drinks from Starbucks or the gas station. Then they have nothing but carbs, and that's all that they eat for the day. And so what's going to happen there? Major insulin issues, major cortisol
Yeah.
issues, major dysglycemia. The hormones that regulate blood sugar are cortisol and insulin, primarily as it relates to the main things that we focus on. There's other ones like glucagon and things like that, but for the sake of what we are worried about, it's stress hormones and insulin. Okay? Whenever those things go up and down, you name it, and you're producing too much of it, what needs to get rid of those? The liver. And so from an early age, the liver already has to start dealing with things and detoxify things. And you start running your bodies down on resources early on in life. Well, once periods get all thrown off and there's heavy cramping and bleeding and all that stuff, especially with the lack of complete development of the frontal lobe, that doesn't happen until you're about 25. What is a 15-year-old girl going to want to do? Whatever I have to do to fix this, just fix it so I don't have to deal with this. Birth control, and it's, oh, just take this pill and you're fine. And there's no thought of like, oh yeah, down the road, are my hormones going to be a mess? Well, you get
Yeah.
on the pill and then fast forward, another 10 years and say you're married and ready to have a kid, get off the pill and say there's issues getting pregnant. Well, what happens? IVF or hormone treatment, things like that, to try to get things at least where they can be to have a kid. And then you have the kid, and throughout the whole process, it's issues of pregnancy, maybe some hormones along the way. And then once the kid's there, what do? You put the kid before yourself. And so if you feed the kid over yourself and you don't take time for yourself, what's going to happen? More stress and more dysglycemia issues, more insulin, more cortisol, you name it. And that's just a lifelong thing. And then once you get to menopause, the adrenals take over and start producing your estrogen and your progesterone and all that stuff, obviously to a much, much lower degree than your ovaries when they, but prior to when they turn off. But if the adrenals are already fatigued from a lifelong process of not getting enough nutrition and depleting of the adrenals, then you're going to have issues with menopause. And so throughout that entire process, it doesn't matter if you are 14 and you're just getting your cycle and you have big problems, or if you are 60 and you're going through menopause and you're still having hot flashes. Liver slash gallbladder, always, 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 always going to be the first thing that we have to address, because there's a depletion of micronutrients that help support pathways to get rid of those hormones, and the liver is the one that's responsible for it. Liver will take those things and dump it into the gallbladder. So whether it's testing for us off the liver or the gallbladder, it doesn't really matter. There's always a liver indicator, and the rhomboids always don't work. It's just whether or not we treat it off the liver or gallbladder. But either way, you're going to get where rhomboids do not want to work, period. When rhomboids don't work, like you said, you're not getting that shoulder back and down stable position. And then you're getting where traps and neck and all those things take over and you get neck tightness. So hormones will absolutely contribute to that. Now, I mentioned previously the uterantosis, where pelvic muscles can actually overfire, especially with bearing down if there are hormone issues, or even with IUDs. That'll cause that every single time.
Yeah.
It'll tug, your pelvic muscles will tug downward on the uterus. It'll tug downward on the fascial connections along the front of your spine, and it'll tug on the neck. And it can cause migraines, it can cause headaches, it can cause neck pain, you name it. So it's always there to some degree. And so hormones, particularly in women, are always the cause. Men, it can be a little bit different. But women, I can't tell you how many women that we have that come in and they're like, yep, let's just get maintenance for massages and things like that beyond the care that we provide, because these muscles just like to act up all the time. And so the fix is identify the underlying cause, which is cortisol, insulin, estrogens, almost every single time. And then it's support the biochemical pathways to get rid of those. And if you're able to do that, the issue resolves itself pretty good, as long as proper dietary habits are there. And so if you're eating good food, eating 3 meals a day, eating proper proteins and fats, not too many carbs, all of those things. And along with it, you're supporting methylation, you're supporting glutathione, you're supporting sulfation, you're supporting, um, all of your hormone detox pathways. That will sort itself out. But it can take cycling through quite a few nutrients to get to that point. And that's where we'll work through each roadblock with patients at each visit as they come up. And then along with that, once you get that rhomboid working, work on trigger points, work on, fascial scraping, work on getting other muscles that might be necessary to also stabilize the shoulder blade, get those working optimally. And so that's the hormone connection. There are other organs like the immune system, things like that we can get into, but for the sake of just this point, hormones, that's really the main thing is estrogen dominance, insulin issues, you name it, all those that will deplete resources to get rid of those hormones in the liver.
Super important stuff. Dr. Tim, what are maybe some of the top recommendations? You kind of touched on some of them, right? You talked about eating right, talked about taking those lifestyle things serious. What are some other recommendations that you might give for someone that's listening to this and they're like, okay, I want to just kind of start somewhere? Are there specific supplements you might recommend? Do you just tell people, hey, if you focus on this nutrition, you focus on this type of lifestyle piece, for a couple months? Like, what are some take homes that you can give here?
Most women that walk into my office with this issue, they're going to walk out with Guard from Thorne.
Mm-hmm.
Now that one, I always check it to make sure that there's not weird stuff that can go on, because all of your methylated B vitamins, some of them can push kind of an excitatory pathway that can make sleep weird and make you feel like manic. And so we double check that every time. Every now and then, like maybe 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20, we'll find that there's problems and we have to do other cofactors to help push resources elsewhere along with it. And so if you're listening to this, if you want to go try that, chances are you'll probably be okay. But just know, if you feel like ramped up and anxious afterwards, maybe don't do that. And maybe you give us a call, because there are cofactors that are necessary to keep that from happening. Just because that happens doesn't mean it's not good for you. It just means that you lack other resources to work alongside it to push it where it needs to be. And so Guard contains B6, B9, B12 in their active forms, and then it contains trimethylglycine. All of those things are super necessary for methylation, but they're also super necessary for supporting 2 of your 3 main hormone detox pathways. To support the other one, artichoke extract, chromium, those are probably the top 2 for that. So if you do chromium, artichoke, and Guard, I mean, you're covering almost all things that you could possibly need for those detox pathways. And so that's going to be super helpful to get ahead of that. But then from there, to figure out how to eat properly to mitigate too many of these hormones to regulate blood sugar, there's an article on my website called Fix This to Skyrocket Your Health. It's just a quick little read. Or you can listen to our stress and anxiety podcast, which I believe is episode number 2, where we really get into the dysglycemia diet, where that's just the blood sugar dysregulation diet, how to mitigate hormone dependence to regulate blood sugar. And if you take those out of the equation as much as you possibly can, you can then conserve those resources to push towards detoxification of estrogens, testosterone, other things. Because your steroid hormones, so your cortisol, your testosterone, your estrogens, those all detoxify through the same pathways. And insulin has overlap with one of those pathways. And so if you support all those pathways, you're going to get rid of all of those things. Not too much. I mean, your body's not going to clear what it doesn't need to clear, but you're going to be able to get rid of those things effectively. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Awesome. Love it. Any specific recommendations when it comes to nutrition or anything lifestyle? I know we talk about these things all the time, and of course we got specific episodes towards them. But obviously we talk about protein intake, we talk about whole foods. Any little last kind of things to mention to focus on there?
That's pretty much it. Whole foods. Walk around the perimeter of the grocery store. Meats, vegetables, good fats, and by good fats I mean things like dairy, butter, animal fats, but then coconut oil, avocado oil, olive oil, all of those things. Avoid your seed oils. That'll all be good. Emphasizing your protein and fat first, and then carbs as an afterthought. Make sure you're eating breakfast. Make sure if you're having caffeine, you do it after you eat breakfast, and don't sip on it throughout the morning. Have your coffee, be done with it. If you're following those guidelines and you're just eating your 3 core meals per day, you're going to fix this problem. It just takes, you're at least going to fix the blood sugar side of it, but the detoxification side of it, I mean, I wish this was something that you just take one thing and you're good to go. But I mean, with the women that come into my office, some of them we got to work through 4 or 5 different nutrients
Yeah.
to fully get through all this stuff. And it's frustrating, but
Yep.
it's like I we get them there, you know.
Yep.
And so I gotta be happy with that. I just wish there was a way to be quicker about it, without
Definitely.
overwhelming with way too many supplements. But that's
For
just how it
sure.
goes.
For sure. Well, Dr. Tim, you've probably seen this, and we haven't actually talked about this, but one thing I've noticed is people tend to be a lot more sick or unwell than they initially think. And that's kind of an interesting idea, kind of an interesting concept. But it's kind
Yeah.
of like the more we kind of really dig into things, we see like, man, there's like, this is kind of a mess. And so, a lot of times our culture and society has kind of told us that, hey, there's a quick fix for this, there's a quick fix for that. And a lot of times that kind of trains us to think that everything's just going to be a fast answer. And sometimes things are a bit worse, from years of bad habits and years of being unwell in different areas of our health. And those things kind of stack up. And so sometimes like, hey, like this is a little bit more intense here. And so obviously we generally want to do our best to get people as well as quick as possible. But at the same time, it's like, man, we're working against 20 years of, too much caffeine or too much stress or whatever the case may be. So, Dr. Tim, let's jump into this immune system health and the gut health and how that impacts the neck. So I just want to touch on a few brief things here. Dr. Tim, I realize we haven't actually made any episodes on the immune system, and I think we should, just because it impacts so many things, and there's so many different areas we could go with it. We've talked about autoimmune issues. We've covered that one pretty well. But the immune system in general, I find, is extremely important for people, along with the gut health. And we've made episodes on the gut health. But going back to the neck pain, if your lower trap muscles are not activated because of some kind of stress with your immune system, some kind of weak component of your immune system, then what will happen is the trap muscles will tighten up and your neck will get tight. And that's a huge source of chronic pain and chronic issues with the neck. And over time, that kind of inflammation can lead to arthritis. But once you stabilize those muscles, like we've talked about, once you strengthen the immune system and fix whatever's causing the issue, we often find incredible relief. And even if people have had it for 20, 30 years, I find that we can get rid of the neck pain. Now, if you take an x-ray of the neck, is the arthritis going to be 100% gone? If you have arthritis, it's not going to be 100% gone, but the inflammatory pathway, inflammatory cells that are causing all this tension and pain, those are going to be dealt with, and that's why people will feel better. Now, with the immune system, how would you know if your immune system is causing issues and it's related to your neck? So in general, what I would say is if you get sick a lot, and kind of just from that your immune system is not very strong, that would be one sign. If you have an autoimmune issue that you know of, that would definitely be a component there. But other than those things, the other pretty consistent thing I would see is when people have like poor posture, like they feel like they really have to try hard to pull their shoulders back. That if you have poor posture and then you also have other different health issues, whether it's different signs of inflammation, aches and pains, sometimes you sleep well, sometimes you don't. A lot of those issues are probably somewhat related to your immune system. So anytime I've seen a patient that has poor posture, it's not because you're too tall. Could it be partly because you sit at a desk? It could be, but think about this. If you sit at a desk all day, your blood and your lymphatic system is not moving. And what's in our lymphatic system? Well, our white blood cells, our immune system. And so our immune system is going to be weaker the more sedentary that we are. So there's a number of things that all tie in there, but it all goes back to your immune system. Now, if your immune system is weak, if you know it's weak, number one, there's a few things that you want to address. So obviously cutting out anything that's going to drive inflammation with nutrition. So processed foods, seed oils, too much sugar, too much caffeine. We've talked about these things before. If you are sedentary, you need to move your body, go on walks, try to get 10,000 steps a day. It's a great place to be, a great place to start. And if you can go more, go more. It's amazing for you. We are inside all day. We barely get outside in the sun. Man, the sun is so helpful for us. Obviously, there's vitamin D, but there's a lot of good components from the sun that helps with our immune system and regulating our nervous system. So get outside more. So these are some basic things with the immune system that can be very helpful. And then also you have, of course, different immune system support like vitamin D3 and K2. A lot of people I find taking 5,000 IU a day is a great place to be. And if you do that much, you might do it for like probably 3 months, and then give it a break, and even consider having it checked on the labs just to see where everything's at. Vitamin C, specifically camu berries, is amazing for your immune system. Getting enough protein, getting grass-fed butter, all those things are amazing for your immune system. And then another thing too, nutrition-wise, I would say if there's any foods that you feel like you might be sensitive to, it's good to sometimes take a break from those, whether it is dairy, whether it is gluten, whether it is corn or nightshades, or eggs even. If you eat those and you kind of notice, man, I didn't feel so great after that. My energy dipped a little bit. Maybe I noticed a little bit more inflammation. Hey, take a break from those foods for about 2-3 weeks and give your body a little bit of a break. So obviously, if you have an immune system issue, like an autoimmune issue, you need to get to the bottom of that, figure out what's driving that, fix that issue, and then reverse that condition. And of course, we got episodes on that. That would be great to listen to. But the immune system can impact the neck for sure. Dr. Tim, anything to add to the immune system? Otherwise, we'll kind of touch on the gut health piece, and then we'll kind of head towards wrapping up.
Well, let's talk about real quick the muscles that are tied to the immune system. So your thymus gland is tied to the infraspinatus muscle. So that's one of your rotator cuff muscles that helps with external rotation of your arm. If that one's dysfunctional, shoulder stability, not there. If your low trap, which is tied to the spleen, is dysfunctional, shoulder stability, not going to be there. And so back to our general theme that we talked about in the beginning, lack of shoulder stability. Any organ that's tied to a shoulder stability muscle can inherently cause some degree of neck pain. And so because those are such big muscles that support shoulder stability, I do find that those are tied in pretty frequently. So that's all that I would add. Just like with the rhomboids and liver issues, get the underlying issue dealt with by whatever nutritional things are necessary. And then from there, treat the downstream myofascial imbalances. Trigger point therapy, scraping, other muscles that are turned off, get all those turned back on.
Yep, for sure. All right, the last piece that can impact your chronic neck pain would be your gut health. So when we talk about gut health, realize that you have, I would argue, gut imbalances in general, which cause things that people deal with every day, like bloating and gas and maybe constipation, diarrhea, maybe just an upset stomach, maybe you just don't feel super great. Those are all symptoms that people deal with a lot. And I've learned that people just kind of put up with that stuff because they've always had it, and they just kind of, they see a lot of other people that have it. And so they just kind of suspect like, man, it's just is what it is. And then there's the other side where it's like, no, I know I have a gut issue. I know I have IBS. I know I have IBD. I know I have Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, whatever the gut issue is. And so in both of these situations, it's super important to, number one, realize that nutrition is key as far as what you're putting into your gut. But then also realizing that a lot of times with gut health problems, while lifestyle is very important to address, stress is important to address, nutrition, sometimes there can be overgrowths and imbalances in the gut from bacteria, fungus, parasites, and again, like I mentioned earlier, food sensitivities. And, while we've made episodes on these things, and I would encourage you to go check those out, the short kind of synopsis there is get the nutrition right, focus on whole foods. If you have bloating and gas, I'd recommend following a low FODMAP diet. By following that diet, you're going to avoid the foods that will feed this bacteria and fungus. And you should notice over time that the bloating and gas decrease. But also, you might need herbs. And so this is where we especially jump into the muscle testing. But there's a number of different herbs that I find that people need. A lot of times when it comes to bacteria and gut stuff, bacteria and fungus, like olive leaf tends to be really good. An herb called Malia tends to be really good. Those are two of maybe the top ones. And occasionally I'll find an herb called Usnea, Astragalus. There's a number of different herbs. And those are probably the top ones that I tend to see. And those can be helpful. The other piece though too is realizing I find a lot of people tend to have parasites. And so things like black walnut and wormwood or artemisia, can be helpful. Morinda can be helpful. There's a number of different herbs that help with parasites, and everyone's a little bit different. So you kind of got to keep that in mind. But those are some of the top herbs that I'll find with things. So in general, if you notice, man, I ate that junk food and my neck felt worse right afterwards or worse the next morning, your gut health is definitely connected to things. Clean up the nutrition, focus on whole foods, get rid of the inflammatory foods. Following that low FODMAP diet tends to be very helpful. And then consider even some different herbs that can help with the gut health. And if you have more questions on the gut health topic, definitely go check out some of our other podcasts on that. I think they'll be helpful for you. So, Dr. Tim, that's kind of all I got there for the immune system and the gut health. Is there anything else that you want to add to that? And then the last kind of piece we could touch on is some of these common questions that we often get about chronic neck pain and questions that patients wonder all the time.
Yeah. The last thing that I think is important to add before we get into all that stuff is how to even identify if your neck pain is driven by these things. Is it a sign and symptom thing where patients just have to observe, yeah, I've got hormone issues, therefore I assume it's this. I don't know if that's probably the best way because you can't really assume things. We always tell people, on our phone consultations before all of our new patients come in, these are all of our ideas, just like we talk about here on the podcast, getting down these rabbit holes of like, hey, based on what you told me with that, I think it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. The only way to know though is to get you in the office and test and see what's going on, and that's our way of doing that. However, how does somebody do that from home? It's not like somebody's going to be like, yep, oh, my infraspinatus is weak, it must be my thymus. That's not how that works. But there are certain things that you can do to see if getting muscles firing improves your neck, then that tells us at the very least we're tied into those muscles. And then if along with it, if you have some sort of hormone issue or whatever, or an immune system issue, then maybe that's, your sign that maybe you should investigate that. Okay. And so there's two main exercises that I will have patients do when they have issues like this. So more often than not, there's rhomboid weakness or there's low trap weakness. Those things tend to go hand in hand. Rhomboids tends to be more heavily correlated with the hormone issues. Low trap, even without immune system issues. What do we do all day? We get in our shrimp posture from sitting at our computers all day. And so low trap gets super neglected. And so hopefully this makes sense, just speaking about it as opposed to showing it. But there are those bands that are probably, 12 inches in diameter, maybe 2.5 inches thick. You can get real light ones, but they're the exercise bands that you can put around your ankles, around your knees to do like hip abduction stuff, things like that. They're really commonly given out in like PT practices, things like that. But the exercise that I'll recommend is you basically put that around your wrists and you put them about shoulder width apart, arms stretched out in front of you like you're going to do a bench press or a push-up. And then from there, you come down and you do a push-up type motion. And as you bring your hands down, your hands must spread. And in order to stabilize that, you need to work external rotation. You need to work your rhomboids, your traps, your infraspinatus, teres minor, all of your rotator cuffs, muscles. And with having to force out as you are bringing your arms out, it gets all those things engaged really heavily. So if you do a couple sets of 10 to 12 reps of that, and then you check afterwards that your neck feels better, your range of motion has improved, and your pain is decreased, that tells us shoulder stability is a big problem. And whatever is driving that, we need to investigate. There's that, and then another exercise, we like to call them Supermans, where basically you lay face down with your arms above your head, kind of like you're doing Y and YMCA. And then as you're laying on the floor or on your bed or whatever, you basically extend your arms backwards and really focus on getting some thoracic extension with it to get those low traps, towards the bottom end of your thoracic curvature working. And so if you do the same thing there, do 10, 12 reps, if you can tolerate it and get those working, and then your neck improves, well, that tells us your low traps are heavily involved. And so those are two different things that you can do from home to try to figure out, is this driving my problem? So anyway, just something to keep in mind if you're trying to be your own diagnostician that can at least point you in the right direction of what's driving it. And then those exercises can help improve things, but with the whole light switch analogy, if your light bulb doesn't work, you can try to turn it on all you want, but it's just not going to work. So you got to deal with the
Yeah,
organ
for
issues.
sure. For sure. Some of these common questions we get, Dr. Tim, is like, is it just due to poor posture? And I would argue, again, it goes a lot of times back to your immune system. And then, like you mentioned, getting those muscles turned on, which some of the exercise, the movement, a lot of those things can help there. Is it because my neck is straight? Dr. Tim, what are your thoughts on that question there?
My answer is no. I think that's a dated chiropractic philosophy um, argument. I don't think it's actually all that legitimate. So to back to our whole chiropractic philosophy, traditional philosophy says subluxation leads to muscle dysfunction. We tend to believe it's more the inverse. Muscle dysfunction leads to subluxation. And so the whole reason the curve tends to get thrown off is your myofascial connections in that area are not regulated properly. There are imbalances. And so the repetitive adjustments, the rehab exercises, all the things that they'll give you to fix this, that can improve as time goes on. However, if you fix the muscles, that is the cause. You must fix that cause, that root cause. And so, dealing with the underlying organ issues, dealing with doing some exercises. I'm totally on board with the exercises, but making sure those muscles work in the first place is super necessary. And so, I do not think that just because you have a straight neck that you should have pain. And the path forward is not necessarily just get adjustments. Adjustments are not phenomenal at just fixing that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right, next question here. Could it be arthritis? Yeah, there could be arthritis, but again, remember arthritis is an inflammatory condition. So you kind of get to the bottom of that inflammatory issue and fix it. And while the arthritis, again, on the x-ray may not completely go away, the inflammation and the pain can go away and things can feel better. Why does massage or adjustment help, but only for a short period before coming back? Again, that's because there is some kind of deeper root issue, like we've talked about here, that needs to be addressed. And then the last thing here, should I massage it myself? Are adjustments helpful? Is massage helpful? Yes, like we've talked about throughout this episode, those things are usually helpful, especially at getting the fascia and the joints kind of balanced out there. But realizing that if the root issue of some kind of internal issue is not fixed, then that massage and the adjustment will feel better, but only for a short time. And so again, remember, the body is one system. And so we have to look at it as one system. We have to treat it as one system if we want it to be as healthy as possible. All right, Dr. Tim, any last comments? Otherwise, let's wrap up here.
Nope, I think we covered everything. Yeah, just know neck issues are more often than not just neck issues. They're shoulder issues, they're organ issues, and they are things that can be multifactorial. We'll put it that way. So hopefully this episode is helpful. Hopefully at the very least thought-provoking to think about what issues you could have that are contributing. And if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out. My name is Dr. Tim Augustiniak here in Bentonville, Arkansas at Flourish Functional Wellness Center. If you want to find me online, my website is flourishfwc.com. There's links to all the socials and then all the contact info for the office on there. Feel free to reach out.
Yep. Likewise, Dr. Joel Miller. The practice is Freedom Health and Wellness in Flower Mound, Texas. That's in Flower Mound, Texas. If you guys have any questions, reach out to us. You can find all our information online at drjoelmiller.com or on Instagram. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next one.